resource for developers to go to. We can't legislate style or fashion. That's almost impossible to do. But years ago, we had an issue in our downtown with regard to signage. We were worried about the check cashing signs, the bright yellow check cashing signs. And we actually addressed that issue with regard to having a resource available for cover signs. And we saw those signs come up from the borough. So we need to encourage developers to do smart thinking, smart planning, smart development, and to take a look at what our history is. We value scale, we value size. We value a town which we can walk. We love our sidewalks and everything which brings us all together. But we do have an issue coming for our town now in terms of the tear down issue. We've seen that. We believe the form-based zoning code will address part of that, but it's not going to prevent tear downs. We are going to get them, demolitions. Form-based zoning code doesn't stop that. So we need to have a resource available to these developers. When they come in, they take a look at the town, they see what we value. And I'd like to open up the discussion tonight to you in terms of what do you value in our town. Yes.
I think one of the things I value most is open space and beautiful trees, land, nature. And, you know, I think one of the distressing things, I live in North Narberth Avenue, and the property on the corner of Woodbine and North Narberth was allowed to take the adjoining lot, which previously was, I believe, unbuildable, and get a variance to build a new house. And they tore down magnificent trees. It just wounds the soul. And there's this tight feeling of housing that I think if we could stop that in terms of keeping our eyes to open space and nature, places for our children to walk and run and play, that to me is more important than buildings.
I know Borough Council is looking at in terms of, when we talk about demolitions now, put a little bit of a pause or breathing room with regard to a notice window, so we can get in touch with those developers and maybe encourage them or assist them in those plans. But I agree. Anyone else? Yes.
I guess it's not so much I agree with the desire. The concern I have, and maybe many of us have, is what Francis was just saying about the new building that has happened in the last year or so. And all the efforts that I know folks have done into establishing a new zoning code that we don't have in place yet. And it's actually hard to really interpret if you read it and go, I don't know how different that would be from what we have. So I guess my concern is, it seems like the only way you can limit the size of what builder puts on a property is by zoning. So are the new recommendations for the zoning ordinance going to increase the setbacks in the surround so that a house as large as what is going on Dudley Avenue couldn't be built? Or the house that's on Narberth Avenue that's being built couldn't be built because it extends so far to the edges of the property. So while the new zoning has been a huge effort of many years, all of these things are coming to a peak right now. If we don't stop the aggressive building that goes on now, it'll be too late because all those little double properties, I'm really concerned about what change we're seeing so quickly in the structure of our space.
The form-based zoning code does address scale and size.
What
Make
did
it
we
more
do?
compatible with what you have in the neighborhood. You wouldn't get the development you're seeing on Dudley now if you had form-based zoning
So
code
that
in
wouldn't have
place.
passed.
Or been addressed. We need to get that passed through council, and that's something we're
That
working
piece
for.
seems so important.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm concerned because reading the form-based zoning code as best I can, it seems that in a lot of cases the density is allowed to increase. And I don't see why we really need to allow that at this point in Narberth. I think that the development in Narberth has gotten to a certain point where it's very pleasant to live here. There's enough open space, and in some cases it would be nice to have a little bit more, but it's got some spaces where there's less density and some spaces where there's more areas where there's more density. And I think to allow that density to increase, whether it was an intentional thing with the new code or whether it was unintentional, I think that I'm concerned that we need to look at that more form-based idea is good, but we might need to take another look at certain areas and how they are proposed to be zoned, and maybe rezone them, reassign them.
We could look at that, see with regard to.
Because in some cases, certain, like if you take property by property, there are certain properties where I could just pick a property out, where there used to be an X number of families allowed. There's actually, now there will be more families allowed on that lot. And that doesn't make sense. And I think in some cases, it may have the unintentional consequence of encouraging greater density, encouraging developers to tear down, even if it's expensive. So I'm concerned about that.
Density, we have, constantly have an issue of density. Is it good or bad? And I think in some ways it has to be managed properly. And I agree with you, that's something we need to take a look at, the way zoning code, make sure it's done properly and correct. If anyone else wants to chime in on the form-based zoning code as well.
Do we have copies of it here? Do we have copies of the?
I'm sure it's in the borough office on the.
Where? Okay.
I can bring a copy.
Okay, yeah, because people can see it if people are interested. It's written it up, so.
Yeah, I mean, there's going to be constant discussion. The council's going to be addressing it early on in 2016. Yes.
I was looking at the form-based zoning code as far as South Narberth Avenue is concerned. And there is, with the new zoning, there would be the possibility of adding 5 apartment houses onto South Narberth Avenue,
Yes.
and possibly more.
I believe only 2 lots on that south side will be eligible for that.
There's 5.
First lot?
Yes. And
I'm not personally, but I'll try to, as much as I can.
the point I was getting at was I was speaking recently with a realtor in the area who she's been here for, since dirt. And she's been selling houses all over this area and out as far as for Narb. And she made the comment that if you drop a apartment house into a residential area, then the houses immediately surrounding that property lose a significant amount of their property value. And she was saying that, we don't know exactly what it would be, but it would probably be somewhere in the neighborhood of 25 to 30%, which is a very scary number for the people that happen to be living next to these locations that we're talking about. And the other thing she said was that when they sell houses in Narberth, they sell Narberth based upon its charm. And if we continue to add apartments and we continue to add commercial space, we run the risk of losing the thing called charm. And she said that would affect, obviously, the property values of every house in Narberth.
I understand. We have to go through a series of smart planning. I would think people 100 years ago would fall over if they saw what we did right now before we developed. I mean, there's pictures that Dennis had on our group that show open meadows, where the average family housing. There's always going to be change. The town is always going to evolve. We just have to be smart about how we do it and how we could go forward with it. And if you're talking about apartment complexes, you're right. We need to take a look at it and see how it's addressed going forward. We can't stop progress.
I agree with that, but at the same time, we don't want to, cut off our nose to spite our face.
I agree, but we need to find a way that allows developers that come into our town to have a resource that also honors the history of our town and the scale and size and development we're looking for. We can't regulate taste. It's going to be almost impossible to do.
But it is to try to figure out how we can encourage better. That's what I'm thinking. Are there ways in which we can encourage better design? Because I think better design solves a lot of that criticism. Because one of the problems we're living under is, I'm sorry, developers often don't work with the best architects, and we wind up suffering for it later because we get really uninspired stuff. that really doesn't fit the scale of the town. I think something, they've added buildings to this town constantly. You want to try to add buildings that are going to be an asset and not something that's, increases your fear that your property values are going to drop. I'm not sure that that's accurate, by the way. But anyway, you want to try to, if there are ways in which we can encourage better design, there's some communities that have been able to really do this. They become places you want to come and see and live in, as opposed to saying, oh, gee, I wish I hadn't built that, so.
Well, what's the
Ultimately, it's a
blueprint?
challenge.
What's the blueprint for those other communities? How are they doing it?
Well, that's kind of like some of the next, I'd like to, maybe as a subsequent thing, we haven't talked about this yet, but really try to maybe bring in some people that have conversations about this. We can sort of see what the potentials are. I mean, there are some towns that have begun from scratch. And then when they've also tried to work within an historic context of trying to, but there should be another way of doing it, because it's like, that's, I think, one of the biggest things is we're not getting good stuff.
The converse is also true, for them to actually acknowledge, understand that they may very well have a great building to deal with. Why?
Yes.
You can tinker with it and make some adjustments, but you don't necessarily need to tear it down, especially the bungalow building, which is in Narberth Avenue.
Yeah, that was perfectly, you could have put an addition on that. It was quite a large building to begin with, but, unless someone can get to that person and convince them of it, show them what can be done. I mean, there's no avenue. They come in, they get approval to do a project, and it's gone. So there's very little chance to really work with them.
And I think we need to have to do a better job in terms of connecting the developers, from our borough office to our representatives with regard to have them reach out and talk to us. We're open to that. We can put them on as to friends of Narberth history or Dennis and say, look, this is what the block looked like before you came in. I'm sorry, yes.
Candidly, I don't think most developers are interested in care.
I agree with
So that's just my confrontational way
See,
of presenting my remarks. I have something more positive to say. I think that if you have a developer who is solely interested in turning a quick buck, they don't care. So the key is, how do you keep developers who are just interested in turning a quick buck out by making it more difficult for them to turn a quick buck? You look at like Narberth Arbors, which I know people that complain about the scale of those houses to some degree, but in hindsight, they're looking pretty good. The design of them is decent, and the architecture, the thought that went into them is not bad, especially the ones that are on that road, right? There you had a developer who had a connection with the community, and had an interest that was greater than just your neighborhood buff.
They look beautiful from the outside, but everyone's talked about the scale and size.
Yeah, that's right, and I'm not, there's always something to complain about, but I think relative to the more recent homes that are built, they're much more acceptable. So I think that it's really important to think about, I don't want to say putting up roadblocks, but yeah, in a way, it's more difficult if you have to wait before you can demolish a building. If there's a process and you're going to have to answer the community and demonstrate that the building is not more easily preserved, and you're going to have to wait. If there are, for example, something I've been thinking about recently, what about if there were building code standards for new construction that served a double interest in our, the fact that you signed on to the climate change, agreement, and so we had some slightly heightened environmental standards for new construction. Something that a developer was looking at Narberth versus, a nearby community advertising something and say, you know what, Narberth's a bit tricky to build in. They've got to have, you need Energy Star standards, or you have to have a higher environmental standard. Before I can tear a building down, I'm going to have to go through a process to do that. Suddenly it doesn't look like as easy a way to turn a buck. And I think right now, we don't really have anything in place. It's like if you're a developer in Greg, and you're like, this is easy. I can buy this, nobody even knows what's going on in this mansion, and I'm listening and I'm $200,000.
We could talk about prohibitions, but you can also talk about incentives.
I know, but I think that the profit incentive that exists is going to outweigh any other incentives that you can provide to a developer by saying, well, gee, we'd really like to talk to you about what we value. You say, well, okay, that's nice, but at the end of the day, I think what they value is making money. So I think it's important to be realistic about ways to make Narberth be a more difficult place to come in and just destroy it and build quick and make money.
I think the form-based code also has control of the size of what can be built. With that, if it's smaller in size than what they're building now, it's not going to be an incentive for the developer to flip it. He needs, the more space they it's downsized in size, you might not be able to incentive for you to go ahead and, take it down and rebuild.
Exactly.
So I think the form-based code does have a restriction on the size of the house that you build, where now it's not.
You may not be able to put like a rating where you want.
Right, exactly. Right,
Or-
so that would automatically deter them from wanting to, flip it and make some money.
It does to some degree, but it depends on where you're doing it in Narberth Avenue. I mean, I've looked at it, you can build that in the code. So, I just think it really depends on the size of the lot. I mean, in some cases it might make a difference, like that, but in some cases it's really enough.
The design of that house though would have to be different because you won't be able to do this front facing garage.
North Narberth Avenue? Oh, I mean, the one that's already constructed.
Yeah.
Not the one that's already.
Form-based, you can't.
The one that's already there, the one that's done for sale.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's got a garage in the back.
No, yeah, no, right.
Yes.
Or the existing form-based.
No,
Yes, that's what I meant, I'm sorry. I got
It's
confused.
the second and third lot.
Can I just add one thing for everybody here who doesn't know it? You can get the form-based code online at the